The sun was beginning to set over the small town of Oakwood. Emma, a 10-year-old girl with bright eyes and messy brown hair, played in the backyard. Her parents, Sarah and Mark, were sitting on the porch, watching her with smiles on their faces. The air was cool and peaceful, with birds chirping in the distance. It was a normal evening, like any other. But that peace was about to be broken in a way no one could have ever imagined. Without warning, a shadow passed over the sky. At first, Emma thought it was a bird, but as she looked up, her heart raced. The shadow grew larger and darker, moving swiftly across the horizon. She squinted her eyes, trying to see what it was. But before she could even understand what was happening, a loud, terrifying roar filled the air. The ground shook, and the sky seemed to crack open. Emma froze, staring up in horror. From the sky, a massive ship descended, its surface dark and metallic, unlike anything Emma had ever seen. The ship's engines roared, sending a shockwave that knocked her off her feet. She scrambled to get back up, but by then, it was too late. The ship landed with an earth-shaking thud, sending clouds of dust into the air. From the ship, strange beings emerged. They were tall, their skin dark and smooth like metal. They moved quickly, with cold, calculated steps. Their eyes glowed, and their technology was far beyond anything the humans of Earth had ever seen. Sarah and Mark rushed to the backyard, calling Emma's name, their voices filled with panic. They had no idea what was happening. They only saw the shadow of a spaceship blocking out the sun, and their daughter was nowhere in sight. Emma tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the ship's engines. Before she could even blink, she felt hands grab her. Strong, cold hands pulled her up into the air, lifting her away from the ground. She kicked and screamed, trying to fight back, but it was no use. The alien beings were too powerful. Her parents reached the backyard just in time to see their daughter vanish into the sky. Sarah screamed her name, but it was too late. The ship rose, soaring high into the sky, leaving Oakwood below in chaos. The peaceful town that had once been filled with quiet nights was now silent, save for the distant sound of the ship disappearing into the clouds. What just happened? Mark whispered in disbelief, his voice shaking. Sarah could only stare at the sky, tears streaming down her face. They took her. They took our little girl. The news spread quickly. At first, many people thought it was some sort of hoax, a strange prank. But the evidence was undeniable. Across the globe, people saw the strange ship. People saw the aliens. News reports flooded every channel, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Authorities scrambled to find answers, but no one had any. The aliens were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered before. They didn't communicate like other beings. There was no language, no signs of intelligence that humans could understand. They came from the sky, took a child, and left without a trace. The world was thrown into chaos. Governments were on edge, unsure of how to react. They had no idea what the aliens wanted, or if they would come back for more. The world had always believed that humanity was safe, that Earth was isolated from the dangers of the universe. But now, that illusion had been shattered. Sarah and Mark stood in their living room, staring at the news on their television. The anchor on screen spoke in a calm voice, but her words only added to the rising terror. There has been a confirmed sighting of a large alien spacecraft in the vicinity of Oakwood, the town where 10-year-old Emma Lawrence was kidnapped. Authorities are working on a response, but at this time, no further details have been released. Mark clenched his fists. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what was happening. His daughter was gone, the child he had loved and protected, taken by these aliens. "We need to find her," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She was trying to stay strong for Mark, but the pain in her heart was unbearable. "They took our little girl. We have to get her back." "We will," Mark said firmly. He had no plan, no idea how they could find Emma. But he knew one thing for sure. He would do anything to bring her home. They think they can take our child without consequence. They're wrong. As the night fell, the world continued to tremble with fear. But beneath the panic, something else was stirring. People were angry, furious. The kidnapping of one child, one innocent human, had sparked something deep inside humanity. They may have been peaceful, but they were not weak. This was no longer just about Emma. It was about their survival. Sarah and Mark were not alone in their desire to get Emma back. Across the globe, others began to rally, speaking of revenge, of fighting back. Governments, once unsure of how to handle the situation, now began to unite in a way they never had before. They started planning. Humanity wasn't going to sit idly by while their children were taken. Back on the alien ship, Emma was being held in a cold, dark room. She could hear voices, but they were alien, foreign. She didn't understand them. She didn't know why they had taken her or what they planned to do with her. All she knew was that she was scared and she wanted to go home. The walls of her small cell were metallic, and there was no way to escape. She tried to push against the door, but it wouldn't budge. She slumped to the floor, tears falling from her eyes. She missed her parents, missed her home. She wanted to go back to her life, back to the safety of Earth. She didn't know it yet, but her life, and the lives of every human being on Earth, were about to change forever. Meanwhile, Earth was changing. The peaceful world that had once existed was now gone. The kidnapping had shattered something deep inside the human heart. They were no longer content to live quietly. The fire of determination was burning brightly across the planet. And it wasn't just the parents of the kidnapped children. Every human being on Earth felt the weight of this loss. They had been wrong to think they were safe. They had been wrong to think they were isolated. Now they had one goal: to bring their children home. But they didn't know what the aliens wanted. They didn't know what they would do next. All they knew was that they couldn't back down. If they did, they might never see their children again. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin. The news of Emma's kidnapping spread like wildfire. It didn't matter where you lived, whether it was a big city or a small village. Everyone heard the story. Everyone saw the aliens. And everyone was filled with fear and rage. People wanted answers. They wanted to know who these invaders were and why they had taken a child from Earth. But there were no answers, only silence. Governments around the world scrambled to respond. Soldiers were put on high alert. Military units, once focused on protecting Earth from other threats, now turned their attention to the skies. They started looking for the aliens, trying to track their ship. But the aliens were gone, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. No one knew where they had gone or why they had chosen Oakwood, a quiet town in the middle of nowhere. In Oakwood, Sarah and Mark were not just grieving. They were planning. They couldn't sit still. They couldn't just wait for the authorities to act. Their daughter was out there, somewhere, and they had no intention of doing nothing. They knew the government would eventually respond, but that wasn't good enough for them. Their love for Emma burned stronger than any fear of what these aliens might do. "We need to find out where they took her," Mark said, standing in the middle of their living room. His voice was filled with determination, but also desperation. He couldn't stop thinking about his daughter, about the look on her face when the aliens took her. Sarah nodded, wiping away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to do something. We can't just wait for them to come back." Together, they started making plans. They couldn't do it alone. They needed help. But who would listen? The government was busy, overwhelmed with trying to figure out what had happened. The people of Earth were united in their anger, but they weren't sure what to do next. Sarah and Mark knew that if they were going to get Emma back, they needed to find a way to make the world act as one. Meanwhile, the world watched in horror as the military tried and failed to track the alien ship. The world's leaders were beginning to realize something terrifying. They weren't ready for this. The alien technology was far beyond anything humanity had, and no one knew how to fight back. People who had once felt safe were now terrified. They wondered if their entire world was under threat. The peaceful life they had known was slipping away fast. But within the chaos, something else was happening. Something much darker. The kidnapping had sparked something in the hearts of humans. They had always thought they were weak, peaceful creatures compared to the rest of the universe. They had believed they were nothing special. But now, they were waking up. The idea that humanity was small, insignificant, that idea was dying fast. And in its place was a fire. A fire that no one could control. In secret, people began to speak of revenge. What had happened to Emma, and to every other child who might be taken next, was wrong. But it wasn't just wrong. It was personal. The more people talked about it, the angrier they became. They wanted justice, and they wanted to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Across the world, cities began to prepare. Military bases were reinforced. Weapons that had once been hidden away were brought into the light. But this wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about protecting what was theirs. And humanity wasn't going to stand by and let their children be taken without a fight. On the alien ship, Emma sat in a small room, trying to make sense of everything. She had never been so scared in her life. She didn't know who these creatures were or what they wanted with her. But one thing was clear. They weren't going to let her go. She had tried to escape once, but it had been impossible. The walls were smooth, and there was no way to break free. She had no idea where she was, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay here forever. She missed her parents more than anything. She missed the warm light of her home, the safety of her bed. She had never imagined that she would be taken by strangers from the sky. And even worse, she didn't know if she would ever see her parents again. But she was a fighter. And even though she was small, and even though she was scared, she wasn't going to give up. She had to find a way out. She had to find a way to get back to her family. Back on Earth, Sarah and Mark weren't the only ones planning. Other families who had lost their children were starting to come together. They shared the same pain, the same anger. And together, they formed a network. A group of people who were determined to find the aliens and take back their children. "We can't do this alone," Sarah said one night, sitting with a group of parents in a small meeting room. "But if we work together, we can find a way. We can figure out where they took our kids, and we can get them back." Mark nodded. "We don't know where they're hiding, but they can't hide forever." The group of parents had no official power, no resources like the government or military. But they had something far stronger: determination. They had something the aliens didn't expect. They were humans, and they didn't give up. Not ever. The storm was growing. The whispers of revenge were becoming louder. Earth was waking up, and the anger of millions of people was starting to unite. They were no longer afraid. They had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The aliens had made the worst mistake they could have, underestimating humanity. As the world began to prepare for the inevitable war, one question remained: would Earth be ready when the aliens came back? Across the world, the storm was beginning to take shape. People had been afraid before, but fear was no longer their enemy. They had learned to face it head-on, and now they were prepared to fight back. The alien invaders had underestimated Earth, thinking humanity was weak. But they were wrong. Sarah and Mark, along with other parents, had gathered a group of determined individuals. The parents weren't the only ones who wanted to bring their children back. As news of the alien attacks spread, more and more people joined their cause. Some were scientists, others were former soldiers, and many were just ordinary people, everyday heroes, ready to do anything to bring their loved ones home. "We can't wait any longer," Mark said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to find them before they take more children." The group gathered in a secret location, planning their next move. The government was still scrambling to understand the alien technology, but the people knew they couldn't afford to wait for bureaucracy. Time was running out, and every moment the aliens spent on Earth made them stronger. "We need to know where they're keeping the kids," one of the parents, a former military strategist, said. "We need to find the alien base." "But how?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "They're using technology we don't understand. We don't even know where they are." A scientist in the group, a woman named Dr. Emily Davis, stood up. She had been studying the alien technology recovered from the few ships that had crashed on Earth. "I might have an idea," she said. "These ships are not like anything we've seen before, but there's something we can try. If we can track the energy signatures of their ships, we might be able to pinpoint where they are hiding." The group listened carefully as Dr. Davis explained her plan. The energy signatures from the alien ships could be tracked, but it would take time. Time that they didn't have. "We can't wait for a perfect solution," Mark said. "We have to act now." Meanwhile, on the alien ship, Emma had been trying to make sense of everything. She had spent days locked away in the small room, but she was no longer the scared child she had been when she was first taken. The fear had been replaced with determination. She had made a plan, and now she needed to put it into action. She had studied the ship's layout. She had watched the guards who came in to check on her. And she had found something. An escape route. It wasn't much, but it was enough. All she needed was a moment of distraction. The ship was a maze of metal and strange technology, and Emma had no idea where she was or how to get back home. But she knew one thing. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let these creatures win. As she moved quietly through the ship, avoiding the patrols, she could hear voices echoing in the halls. The aliens spoke a language she couldn't understand, but their tone was unmistakable. They were talking about her, and whatever they planned to do next. Emma didn't know what they wanted with her, but she knew it wasn't good. Back on Earth, the pressure was mounting. The alien threat was real, and humanity was beginning to realize just how vulnerable they had been. The military was still working on countermeasures, but it was slow going. The weapons Earth had were no match for the advanced technology the aliens had shown. But the people weren't waiting around for a miracle. They were taking matters into their own hands. Sarah and Mark, along with their group, had begun gathering supplies. They knew they would need everything they could get if they were going to find the alien base. The journey ahead would be dangerous. But they didn't care. Nothing was more important than getting their children back. "We don't know what we're up against," one of the parents, a former engineer, said as they packed their gear. "But we do know this. We have to stick together." "We will," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear that still gnawed at her. "We'll bring them home." The plan was simple but dangerous. The group would split into teams, each taking on a different part of the mission. One team would work with Dr. Davis to track the alien ships using the energy signatures. Another team would gather information from the few surviving witnesses of the alien encounter, and the rest would focus on preparing for the eventual confrontation. As they made their way toward their respective tasks, the group knew there was no turning back. Every moment was precious, and the aliens had no idea what was coming for them. They had thought Earth was weak. They had thought humanity was nothing more than prey. But they were wrong. Now, the storm was ready to break, and Earth would strike back with everything it had. The alien ship loomed in the distance, its dark, twisted metal reflecting the cold light of a distant star. Inside, the leaders of the alien force discussed their plans, unaware of the fury building on Earth below. "They're not going to give up," one of the commanders said, his voice filled with frustration. "We've taken their children, and now they're fighting back." "What do you expect?" another leader replied. "They're human. They'll fight for what's theirs." The leader paused, considering this. "Perhaps, but they won't be ready for what's coming. We have the advantage, and soon we'll have their planet in our grasp." But even as they spoke, they didn't realize the mistake they had made. They had underestimated Earth, and humanity wasn't about to let them get away with it. As the first teams began their missions, they were unaware of how close they were to finding the heart of the storm. The alien threat was real, and every decision they made brought them one step closer to the final confrontation. But for Sarah, Mark, and all the parents who had joined them, there was no turning back. This wasn't just about their children anymore. This was about every human being on Earth. The fight was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival. And humanity was ready to show the aliens just what they were capable of. The night was darker than usual, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Earth was on the edge of something big, something dangerous, and yet everyone felt it. The tension was thick in the air, and every movement seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Sarah, Mark, and the others had gathered in their secret base, preparing for what was to come. The group had been training for weeks, learning how to work together and how to fight as one. But now, the time for talking was over. Sarah stood at the front, staring out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. She couldn't help but wonder about Emma. Was she okay? Was she still alive? The thought made her heart ache, but there was no time to dwell on that. Her daughter needed her, and so did every other child the aliens had taken. Earth was no longer a planet of scared, unprepared people. They had learned, adapted, and now they were ready to strike. Mark approached her, his face set in determination. "It's time," he said softly, his voice steady despite the tension. Sarah nodded. "I know." They moved quickly, joining the others as they prepared to leave. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. They would infiltrate the alien stronghold, rescue the children, and take down as many of the invaders as they could. They weren't sure how many aliens were inside, but they knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The longer they waited, the more children the aliens could take. They had spent days studying the alien ships and the technology they had brought with them. It wasn't enough to understand the full extent of what the aliens were capable of, but it was enough to know that the time for waiting was over. They couldn't allow these invaders to take any more innocent lives. Meanwhile, aboard the alien ship, Emma had found herself at the center of a storm she never could have imagined. The ship was vast, its corridors stretching endlessly in every direction, and the alien guards were everywhere. But Emma had learned to move in the shadows, just like the humans she'd read about in stories. Brave souls who fought for what was right, no matter the cost. She had made it farther into the ship than she ever thought possible. The strange alien machinery around her seemed to pulse with an energy that made her skin crawl. But Emma wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being a victim. She was determined to escape, to find her way back home. As she snuck through the hallways, Emma found a small control room. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices inside. Without thinking, she slid silently into the room and hid behind a stack of alien crates. The aliens inside were speaking in their strange language, but Emma could understand enough to make out a few words. "She's still alive," one of them said, their voice cold and mechanical. "She's a human child." Another one replied, "She's of no use to us. She'll be disposed of soon." Emma's heart raced. Disposed of soon. That meant they were planning to kill her. She had to hurry. She moved quickly, ducking out of the control room and into a side hallway. But just as she turned a corner, she heard footsteps behind her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The guards were coming, and there was no time to hide. Back on Earth, Sarah and the team were making their way toward the alien base. They had spent hours planning every move, every step. They knew this mission was a one-way trip for many of them. There was no going back once they crossed into enemy territory. But they didn't care. They had already made the decision to fight for their children, for their homes, for their planet. "This is it," Mark said, looking at the others. "We don't know what we're going to face, but we're ready." Sarah nodded. "We are." The team moved swiftly, using the cover of night to get as close to the alien stronghold as possible. They didn't have the advanced weapons the aliens did, but they had something just as powerful: their will to protect. Their weapons might not have been high-tech, but their hearts were stronger than any alien force. They reached the entrance to the alien base, hidden in the thick woods outside the city. The base was heavily guarded, but they had a plan. They would infiltrate through the underground tunnels they had discovered during their reconnaissance. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had to get inside undetected. The group entered the tunnels cautiously, moving quietly as they navigated the dark, twisting paths beneath the alien base. They could hear the sounds of alien chatter echoing through the walls, but the further they went, the more they realized how deep and dangerous the alien presence truly was. They reached a large chamber filled with strange, glowing machinery. The walls were lined with alien tech, and in the center of the room, a giant hologram displayed a map of Earth. Mark took a deep breath. This is it. We're getting close. But as they continued their mission, they had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The aliens had already detected their presence. On the alien ship, Emma's escape was not going as smoothly as she had hoped. The guards were closing in, and her heart pounded in her chest. She had to get out of there, now. She sprinted down the hallway, looking for any way to hide, to escape. Just as she turned another corner, she found a small maintenance door. Without thinking, she pushed it open and slipped inside. It was dark, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal, but she didn't care. She had to keep moving. She couldn't let them find her. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the hallway outside. The door slammed shut, and Emma realized that she was locked in. Panic surged through her, but she quickly fought it back. She couldn't let fear control her now. She had to stay calm, think clearly. She started looking around, searching for a way to break out. There was no way she was going to let the aliens win. Back on Earth, the alien base was preparing for an all-out assault. The humans had breached their defenses, and now they had no choice but to respond. They were ready for a fight, and they would make sure the humans would never threaten their plans again. But the humans were prepared too. They knew the risks, but they didn't care. This was for their children, and Earth would never back down. The air was thick with tension, a heavy silence hanging over the alien base. Sarah and the team had managed to slip past the guards and into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. But they knew their time was running out. The alien forces were closing in, and it wouldn't be long before they were discovered. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest as she led the group through the narrow, dimly lit corridors. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of their mission was pressing down on them. The walls seemed to close in, but they couldn't stop now. Not when the children, her daughter, Emma, were so close. "This way," Mark whispered, leading them down a side passage. He had been scouting ahead, his eyes always searching for any signs of danger. He was a natural leader, calm under pressure, and Sarah trusted him completely. As they turned a corner, they came to a large door, guarded by two towering alien soldiers. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the chamber where the children were being held. Mark motioned for the others to stay back as he approached the door. With a quick glance, he checked his weapon, making sure it was ready. The team had prepared for this moment, but they still didn't know what awaited them behind the door. The alien forces were vast, and they were about to face their greatest challenge. "We move on 3, Mark said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. Sarah nodded, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. She didn't want to fight. She never wanted to hurt anyone. But these aliens had taken her daughter. They had stolen the innocence of countless children, and she would do whatever it took to get them back. 1, 2, 3, Mark ordered. The door slammed open, and the team rushed in. The room was vast, filled with high-tech equipment and strange, alien machinery. At the far end, they could see rows of children, huddled together in cages, their faces pale and full of fear. It was a sight that broke Sarah's heart, but there was no time to mourn. They had a mission to complete. The aliens guarding the room were caught off guard, and before they could react, the team opened fire. The weapons were crude compared to the alien technology, but they were effective enough to take down the guards quickly. The aliens didn't stand a chance, but the battle wasn't over. As the last guard fell, another door on the far side of the room opened, revealing a new threat. More aliens, armed and ready for a fight. They had been waiting, prepared for this moment. Sarah and the team had been foolish to think they could slip in unnoticed. "Get the kids out," Mark shouted, as he and the others moved to engage the new wave of enemies. Sarah rushed to the cages, her heart racing as she tried to unlock them. The children inside were terrified, their eyes wide with fear. Some of them were too young to understand what was happening, while others clung to each other for comfort. But Sarah didn't have time to reassure them. They needed to escape, and they needed to do it fast. "Come on, let's go," she shouted, her voice sharp as she pulled the bars apart. The children hesitated, their fear holding them in place. But Sarah wouldn't let them wait any longer. One by one, the children began to move, running toward the exit as Sarah guided them. But the aliens were closing in, and the team was outnumbered. The hallway was filled with the sound of blaster fire and the screech of alien weapons. Mark was fighting at the front, his team covering the rear as the children made their way to safety. Sarah glanced back, catching a glimpse of the battle behind them. Mark was holding his own, but the odds were stacked against them. They couldn't hold out forever. "Move faster," Sarah urged the children. "We're almost there." The last child was out of the cage, and Sarah quickly turned to join the others. But just as she was about to leave, a loud crash echoed from behind. The aliens had breached the door. The next wave of invaders was closing in fast. "We need to go now," Mark yelled as he held the door with everything he had. The aliens were pushing against it, but it wasn't going to hold for much longer. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest child and ran toward the exit, her heart pounding as she raced through the corridors. The sound of alien footsteps behind them was growing louder, but they couldn't stop. Not now. They burst into the open air, the cool night sky greeting them as they ran toward the waiting transport ships. But even as they moved, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. The aliens wouldn't stop until every last human was dead. "Keep moving," Mark shouted from the front. The team was already halfway to the ships, but Sarah couldn't let her guard down. The battle was far from over. They reached the ships and quickly boarded, the children piling in behind them. As the doors sealed shut, Sarah looked around at the faces of the survivors. They had made it out, but it wasn't over yet. The war had only just begun. Meanwhile, aboard the alien ship, Emma had managed to slip past the guards, her heart racing as she snuck through the hallways. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up, but she knew she couldn't stop now. Her family, her people, were depending on her. She found another maintenance door, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She pushed it open, slipping inside and quickly locking it behind her. The room was small and dark, filled with strange tools and equipment, but it was quiet, too quiet. Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. She had to find a way to escape, to get back to Earth, to her family. Suddenly, the door to the room rattled. Someone was outside. Emma froze, holding her breath as the footsteps grew louder. She knew she didn't have much time. She had to act fast. The door crashed open, and Emma barely had time to react before a hand grabbed her arm. She gasped, but then she saw the face of the person holding her. It wasn't an alien. It was one of her own. "Sarah," Emma cried, relief flooding through her as she was pulled into her mother's arms. "Let's go," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with determination. They weren't safe yet, but they were one step closer to freedom. The escape had been close, but now they were in a race against time. Sarah and Emma, along with the team and the children they rescued, had boarded the transport ships and begun their journey back to Earth. But they knew the aliens wouldn't stop. The battle was far from over. The aliens would come for them again, stronger and more determined. "Where's the nearest safe zone?" Mark asked, his voice grim as he looked out at the stars. They were on the move, but it wasn't enough. They needed a plan, and fast. "Earth is still a few light years away," Sarah replied. "We can't outrun them forever." The tension in the ship was palpable. Every eye was on Sarah and Mark, waiting for them to make a decision. They had no choice now but to stand and fight. If they didn't, everything they had worked for would be lost. The aliens would return, and the Earth would fall. "Get to the weapons room," Mark ordered. "We need to make this ship a fortress." As the team moved to prepare for the coming battle, Sarah glanced at Emma, who was sitting quietly beside her. The young girl had grown more quiet in the days since they had escaped, and Sarah could see the weight of what had happened pressing down on her. Sarah's heart ached for her daughter. No child should have to go through what Emma had. But they couldn't focus on the past. Not now. They needed to prepare for what was coming. Hours passed, and the crew made their preparations. The ship's weapons were now fully armed. Sarah, Mark, and the rest of the team were ready. The children, though young, were also being trained in self-defense, learning how to protect themselves. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were fighters. And then the alarm blared. "They found us," one of the crew members shouted, his voice trembling with fear. The ship shuddered as the first wave of alien ships appeared on the radar. They had been tracking the humans all along, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, they were here. "Brace for impact," Mark shouted, grabbing hold of the control panel. The ship jolted as the aliens launched their first round of attacks. Blaster fire rained down on them from all sides, shaking the ship to its core. The crew scrambled to keep control, but the power was flickering, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure. "Hold on," Sarah yelled, gripping the side of her seat. "We're not giving up." The first wave of aliens was coming in fast, their ships sleek and deadly. They fired relentlessly, their weapons tearing into the human ship's defenses. But Sarah knew they could take it. They had no choice. They had to fight back. Mark barked orders as the crew fired back with everything they had. The battle outside the ship was fierce, but Sarah focused on one thing: her daughter. She needed to make sure Emma was safe, no matter the cost. As the ship continued to rock under the bombardment, Sarah made her way to the cargo hold, where Emma and the other children were hiding. They were safe for now, but Sarah knew the aliens would stop at nothing to get to them. "Stay down," Sarah called out as she entered the hold. She knelt beside Emma, pulling her into a tight hug. "We're going to get through this, okay?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but her hand gripped Sarah's tightly. The bond between them was unbreakable, and that was all that mattered right now. The ship lurched again, and Sarah felt a cold chill crawl down her spine. They were losing control. The aliens were too strong, and they weren't going to stop. Outside, the battle raged on. The alien ships circled the human transport, firing at will. Mark and the crew fought with everything they had, but it was clear they were outnumbered. They couldn't hold out forever. "Get us out of here," Mark shouted to the pilot, his voice strained with urgency. "I can't," the pilot replied, his voice panicked. "The engines are damaged. We're stuck. Then we fight until the end," Sarah yelled, turning back to face the children. "This is our home, and we're not giving it up." The crew kept firing, their weapons charging with each blast. Sarah couldn't hear the explosions outside, but she could feel them. Every hit, every blast, every impact. It was like the ship was about to fall apart, but they held on. They had no choice but to keep fighting. And then, in the midst of all the chaos, Sarah saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A bright light, flashing in the distance. It was far off, but it was getting closer. "What's that?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with hope. Mark turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the light. "It's too big to be one of theirs." The light grew brighter, and soon it became clear that it wasn't just a light. It was another ship, human, a fleet, coming in fast and strong, appearing out of nowhere to back them up. "Reinforcements," Mark shouted, relief flooding through him. "We're not alone." Sarah's heart soared as the new fleet entered the battle, their weapons charging up and firing with precision. The tide of the battle was turning. The aliens were no match for the combined might of the human fleet. As the reinforcements tore through the alien ships, Sarah and her team took a moment to catch their breath. The battle wasn't over, but they had a fighting chance now. They weren't alone in this fight, and Earth was going to make sure they paid for every life they had taken. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, whispering words of comfort. The end was near. They had come so far, and they weren't going to lose now. They would fight, and they would win, no matter what. The battle raged on, the stars lit by the flashing lights of laser beams and explosions. The fleet of human ships had arrived, and they weren't holding back. The aliens, once so confident in their strength, were now scrambling, caught off guard by the overwhelming force of humanity's wrath. Sarah gripped the control panel, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Mark was by her side, shouting orders to the crew as they fought tooth and nail to defend their home. The first wave of alien ships had been destroyed, but the fight was far from over. The reinforcements had made a difference, but now it was a matter of finishing what they started. "Give them everything we've got," Mark yelled, determination in his voice. The weapons systems fired on all cylinders, blasting alien ships from every angle. The human fleet wasn't just fighting back. They were sending a message. Earth wasn't helpless. Earth wasn't weak. Earth wasn't going down without a fight. Sarah watched as the alien ships fell one by one, their once imposing forms disintegrating in flashes of light. The humans were closing in, their weapons precision-guided, their fighters relentless. The battlefield was chaotic, but in that chaos, the human forces were finally showing their true strength. "Sarah, we've got incoming," one of the crew members shouted. Before Sarah could respond, the ship shuddered as another alien vessel fired on them. The shields held for a moment, but they began to flicker under the strain. Another hit, and the lights dimmed. "We're taking damage," the pilot yelled. "We can't afford to lose focus now," Mark growled. He slammed his fist on the panel. "Get us in position to strike." The human ships, fueled by a mixture of anger and desperation, pushed forward, their weapons focused on the heart of the alien fleet. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Every moment felt like it could be their last. But they couldn't give up. They couldn't let Earth fall. "Hold steady," Sarah shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're not backing down." As the ship was rocked by another explosion, Sarah's mind raced. She needed to find a way to end this, quickly. The aliens would keep coming, and humanity had to show them the full force of their power. There had to be something they could do that would turn the tide for good. "Mark, I have an idea," Sarah said, her mind clicking into place. "What is it?" he asked, his voice urgent. "We've got to hit their command ship. If we take that down, the rest of their fleet will fall apart. We can't just fight off their ships. We need to destroy the heart of their operation." Mark's eyes met hers. He knew she was right. They had been fighting for so long, but this was it. If they didn't destroy the command ship, they wouldn't win. Not truly. "All right, let's do it," Mark said, his voice resolute. "All ships, focus fire on the command vessel." The human fleet shifted, aligning their weapons on the largest alien ship in sight. The command ship, the heart of their invasion force. The battle had been intense, but this was the moment they'd been waiting for. Sarah's mind was focused. This had to work. If it didn't, they would lose everything. "Firing," the weapons officer announced. A volley of energy blasts shot from the fleet, all heading straight for the command ship. The massive alien vessel tried to evade, but it was too late. The first round of fire struck, and the ship rocked violently. But it didn't stop. The aliens fought back, sending their own barrage of fire toward the human ships. "Hit them again. Don't give them a chance to recover," Sarah screamed. The human fleet continued to pound the command ship with everything they had. The explosions were deafening, the flashes of light blinding. Then, with a final explosion, the alien command ship's shields gave out, and the core of the vessel exploded, sending shockwaves through space. The remaining alien ships faltered. Without their command center, they were lost, unable to organize or respond. The humans pushed forward, their enemies in disarray. The aliens scattered, trying to escape, but the humans weren't going to let them. Not this time. "We did it," Mark said, his voice filled with awe. Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief. The battle was won. The aliens had been defeated. But the victory was bittersweet. It had come at a cost. So many lives lost. So much destruction. But Earth had fought back. And now, the aliens knew they couldn't mess with humanity. "It's over," Sarah whispered. But the fight wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The human fleet began to turn toward Earth, heading home. But this victory, this moment, was a turning point. The universe would know that humanity wasn't a species to be taken lightly. They had come from the brink of destruction, and they had come back stronger. The aliens had made the worst mistake of their lives, and now they would pay the price. As Sarah looked at the children, Emma and the others, she realized that the fight for Earth was more than just a battle for survival. It was a fight to protect everything they held dear. A fight to ensure that Earth would remain a shining beacon of hope, no matter the cost. "We did it," she said again, her heart swelling with pride. And with that, the human fleet, now victorious, made its way back home. But the universe would never forget the wrath of Earth.